why are you doing what you're doing? Does it matter? Does it make a difference? Are you punching a clock? Are you taking a paycheck? Or do you really believe in what you're doing? And I used to use this little story about the three guys in the sidewalk, right? And one guy's taking bricks and putting mortar on it and putting it down on the sidewalk and doing it again, and you walk up and you say, what are you doing? He says, what do you think I'm doing? I'm putting bricks and mortar here. And you go to the guy 10 feet down who's doing exactly the same thing. And you say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a wall. And you go to the third guy who's 10 feet down from him and doing the same thing. And you say, what are you doing? He said, I'm building a cathedral. And you have to understand the cathedral, even if you're slinging bricks and mortar every day. It's like, do I really know why I'm doing what I'm doing? And is it important? Is that important to do? Right? I think that's the best advice I could give anybody.
David, sincere thanks. Honored that you're here in so many ways. I hope you know that.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Agenda-wise, blank sheet of paper, going to be talking about leadership. How much different is leadership? When you get to the point where you're going to influence somebody, you're going to make a decision, how much different is it at the base of an organization from like the C-suite, okay, in terms of the way we go about it, the way we make the decision, the way that we implement the decision?
So, this is an evolution for me, and I can now look in retrospect at what I did or didn't do at times. So I think at the highest level in the organization, after a couple of years, I realized I liked to manage. So I had everybody that worked for me have a set of objectives. I would sit with them quarterly or every 4 or 5 months, go over how are we doing toward these objectives. I really thought the management process is very important from a leadership perspective to make sure they know that we're having a discussion not about why we do stuff, but what are we doing and how are we getting it done? Like, are you going to deliver on these results that you and I agreed at the beginning of the year? That's what we're going to do. And I kept that. I thought that was important. But the thing that I changed was my contract with you as a C-suite person, which is, I don't really have a lot of room for stuff not getting done. Like you're accountable for this part of the organization and you have to deliver on it. And if it's not going to happen, if I have to tell you that it's not happening, then this is a bad relationship. You need to be able to tell me something's not happening and we'll figure out what the implications of that are. But in the end, this is a really short string for me. Like if you're not getting the job done, I got to get somebody who can. I'm not in the rehab business at C-level. Like I'll coach you, I'll hold you accountable for work, but in the end, it's on you. And when it's on you, you need to come to me when you're feeling it's heavy on you and you need some advice, you want to make me aware of something, that's really important, right? Because then we can have a conversation about it. Because if I have to bring it to you, then that's not good at all.
Yeah.
Then you're missing the beat somewhere. Your sensing mechanisms aren't working. Mine should never work better than yours in your organization. If I know stuff about your organization, you don't know about stuff that's not getting done. Like that's not good if you're not telling me, right?
Yeah.
And I think that farther down in the organization, that's not necessarily the case, So I think it
more string, more runway.
It's more. Then there's more management.
More okay.
There's more
mistake. Okay, we can recover.
I can coach. Let's talk about this. What do we need to do to get through it? How much tolerance do I believe? That I've got my binary approach to management, which is willingness and ability. Ability is skill and willingness is coaching. And if you can do something but you don't want to do it, I got a problem and I need to figure out why, because I don't have to put you through training. I need to figure out, here's the box on the organizational chart. We need this kind of work out of the box. Are we getting that kind of work out of the box right now? No, we're not. Well, funny, let's take you out of the box for a minute and just talk about the box. Do you believe that box should deliver this kind of work in our organization? Because that box comes to me and I think that's what this box should do. Well, yeah, it probably should be. Well, and you and I both agree now you're not doing that kind of stuff in that box. You're doing something a little different than that, huh? Yeah, so let's talk about that, right?
Yeah.
So, I think, in the organization, you spend more time trying to figure out, if I'm going to correct this, what's the investment required to do it? Because it's a significant investment to cut a person loose, try to recruit someone, and then bring them in and train them to do the job. That's significant, just financially. People will quantify it. I can't quantify it. It's all about distraction. It's all about how much time you spend doing stuff. I mentioned to you earlier today, one of the best things I was able to do, at this board I'm on, is hire a good CEO, because, he has taken the reins and responsibility for that company, which is great. So it's, it's the same kind of thing. It took a while to get there, but, the distraction and everything else that went on ahead of that was crazy in terms of time invested and what you had to do. And then all of a sudden, poof, it's clear I got something that works. And if you think you can get somebody fixed, if you can coach them to the right spot that they can then do the job the way you want it done, that's a much better outcome if you take the time to do it. But at the C-suite, I don't know. It's a little different.
Yeah. So there's kind of strands of similarity, but the dynamic, it's far more transparent, right? It's like, you're in this job, this is what you're responsible to do, and if you're not doing it, it's just kind of a foregone conclusion, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but I'll never forget it. But I think it was like the week before you took the big job. We were together. And we were walking along, and you said, like the life expectancy of a new CEO is like 6 months.
Yeah.
Remember saying that?
Yeah, I know. I remember,
Yeah, so it's kind of like, I was going, was it 6 months? What do you, like, really? Like, wow.
Yeah.
But
I just read you a CEO obituary today, by the way, which was 6 months.
Yeah.
He lasted 6 months, that guy. But go ahead. Sorry.
No, but and you were 6, 7 years, or?
Yeah, going on almost 7. 6.5, 7 years. Yeah.
So you obviously figured that whole thing out. But what I wanted to say, when did you know? When in your career, when did you say, you know what, I think I could play at that level? I mean, somewhere between a hospital in New York someplace, and what was going on when you sort of started, and maybe you thought that from the minute you were hired, but when did you kind of come to grips with the whole idea of, I kind of get this. I understand this. I think I can play there, and that's something I want to do. Was there a moment in time, or was there a series of things, or?
It was an incremental path in my thinking to where I concluded that I might do that job if I got the opportunity, if I was given the opportunity. And the first realization of it came when I took over the North American business as the CEO of North America. And after a couple of years in that job, where I was on the staff, right, I was on the management team of the CEO. So, I got to see how things were being done. We met every month for a couple of days. So you spent a lot of face time with the CEO. You didn't see all the problems. You had a significant sampling of the kinds of things at a corporate level as opposed to at a division level, which, quite frankly, I was dealing with. I said to you a few minutes ago, a lot of stuff I dealt with, I never took to the CEO. I just took care of it. I handled it. It was my responsibility. That's why I said to you before, I was so surprised when I got into that job and saw what it was, these guys are senior people in the C-suite bringing me stuff. I'm like, that's not, like, I would never have brought that to Tom. As when I was running North America, I wouldn't have brought that to the CEO. That's my accountability to fix. If I don't fix it, he's going to hold me accountable. So it was the combination of having that kind of experience running the North American business and being part of the management team that a few years into running North America, Tom didn't do quarterly review. He just once a year sit you down and do like his view of the performance appraisal. And he was a guy who, if he was successful, he was going to have a 7, 8, 9 year run. So it wasn't like I'm thinking, I got the US job, now I'll go get that job. But a few years into it, he said to me, over the next year, we ought to consider whether or not, someday I'm going to leave this job. If you'd be interested in it, you'd have to, it's personal sacrifice. It's a really hard job.
Yeah.
He said to me, you have no idea. So he said, yeah. And I didn't.
Yeah.
When I took the job. I thought I did, till I got the job.
I don't know if you remember this, but I certainly do. Again, is like we were looking at each other over an adult beverage in a pub in London somewhere, and you said to me, Sam, I had no idea how hard this was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember feeling the enormity, of just like how big that kind of job is for somebody that really cares.
Yeah.
I suppose for somebody that didn't really care, it's kind of a different thing. But talk about that a little bit. Just some of the unforeseen stress, the things that you just were blindsided by that were like, oh, wait a minute, this is, I got to take care of this. Like, hold on. What surprised you, when you got to CEO of?
Well, I mean, and I said it to you that day in that pub, and I'll say it again, it's an enormous job, and it can be all-consuming. You can work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you would never accomplish all of what you say to yourself, this is what I really want to be doing or need to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, an example of that was a strategic decision that the board had allowed the prior CEO to make, which was we were not going to invest in biologics. We were going to be a small molecule company going forward, and we might license in some biologics, but that's not going to be a main part of our R&D platform and our commercial platform going forward. And that was really a European kind of decision. Our CEO was a European, and he was based in England. I ran the US business, and while he saw it and understood it to some degree, in the late 1990s, biologics were really just coming into their own, and it started in the United States. And it wasn't happening in Europe. Europe was slow to adopt the biologics, primarily because of the cost, not because of the effect that they had. But one of the things I felt, all along, and certainly discussed it with the board when, they asked me if I wanted to be the CEO, is I felt we needed to have a biologics platform. That was a future technology that the company should have an investment in, and a significant investment. And the board agreed with that. They kind of looked, you think now it's 2005, 2006, we've got 5-6 years of biologics experience in the US, and you've got some European markets that are stepping up to it now and saying, we got to have drugs like Humira available for our people because it alters disease. It's not just treating a symptom. This changes the path of a disease. These are significant advances in medical treatment. And if we're going to be a leading pharmaceutical company, a biopharmaceutical company, we got to be doing that stuff. You can't say, well, we'll let that go and we'll keep treating symptoms when you can change disease. And so over the course of that first year I was in that job, we did a lot of work to try to figure out were we going to make it or buy it. Should we create our own biologics division and start to build it and hire people and spend capital and put up, reactors and buildings, or should we find a biotech company? And we ended up buying two. And it was the most significant thing I did in the 7 years, in terms of strategy that I was, the CEO for. And now to the point you asked me about to start it all, I never expected the kind of blowback I got internally and externally for shifting the strategy of the company, 45 degrees, not 180 degrees, but it wasn't 1 degree, it was, we're going to be in biologics and we're going to buy in. It's an expensive buy, but it'll take 20 years to build it. We don't have 20 years because this market's going to run. And for the whole time that I was in the job, my research and development organization of AstraZeneca resented the fact that we had bought the biologics business, isolated it, and instead of increasing the R&D budget, I started paring down the small molecule budget and moving some of that money over to biologics. So it wasn't that we increased the R&D spend from $4 to $5 billion. We kept it at $4, but if you were in the small molecule side of things, your world was getting smaller because we were investing more in biologics. So had a whole resentment internally that I was constantly dealing with. Had a commercial organization that couldn't, when's the biologics coming through? We spent a lot of money. When are the biologics? We need new stuff. We don't have any new drugs, And the market, hated me for it because we had a $4 billion share buyback program going because we couldn't invest the money. in anything else. So we were giving it back to shareholders. And we spent 14 or 15 billion dollars to buy into biologics, which was a couple of years of buybacks. And we kept the $1 billion buyback anyhow. I mean, that's how much cash we were generating to be able to make those kinds of decisions. But that strategy is a 10 to 15 year strategy. It's only playing out now, right? Pfizer made a run at AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca held up the shield, and the shield was their biologics business. This is going to be worth $40 billion by the year 2023. And that's, half of it was diabetes stuff, but the rest of it is all cancer drugs, asthma drugs, all biologics. And so that's how long it takes for the strategy to play out, which you couldn't explain that to investors. I could never say we're kind of going to decrease that spend and increase this spend. It's, they're much shorter term. So, so making a strategic decision that you believe is the right thing to do, that the board supported, although cost more money than we thought it was going to cost at first, but but I think in the end, take a look at the company now. It's very well positioned in the biologics future, which is really important because the small molecule business has significantly declined, right, because of generics. So, but stuff's coming at you constantly. Nobody walks in and says, "Wow, everything is great." When they darken the door, like, "Can I have 5 minutes?" It's not 5 minutes, and it's not because they want to tell you everything's great.
You're anticipating.
When your general counsel comes in and shuts the door, says, "We have a problem in China." I said, "Well, I heard part of that story." And he said, "Well, here's the rest of the story." And he walks out, and the head of commercial walks in 2 minutes later. I know the general counsel was just in here talking about China. Let me tell you something about China. It's like the exact opposite of what the general counsel thinks we should do as to what the head of commercial thinks we should do, because everybody agrees we have a problem in China. How do you resolve that problem?
What do we do? Yeah. There comes a time when you ascend as far as you did in a corporate position, where you're perceived differently. People treat you differently. You're no longer, you're now. How do you handle that transition?
Organizational behavior, it's that old story. You ask for the time, and the one line you always hear is somebody goes and builds you a watch. But when you're the CEO and you ask for the time, there are subgroups that go out. What does he mean by time? Do you think he's talking about the time we're in now or a future time? You think he's talking about the time on the watch? So it gets very convoluted very quickly when you realize you asked a question and the organization marches off to try to create the very best answer. And after that happens once or twice, you realize you need to be very careful about what you ask for and how you ask for it, to make it very, very clear that you don't want 3 subgroups going off to discuss the concept of time. Like, all I want is, is it 10:15? Yeah, because I got to make a phone call,
Yeah.
And I think you need to have a few examples where it went haywire that you can show the organization, geez, that's not what I expected to happen. Like, I know you guys want to please me, but let's make sure we're clear on how much resource we should put behind this if I say there's something I think we ought to do. As I said to you a minute ago, the other part of that is being careful about what you ask for versus what you can get yourself without creating a whole subculture of, we've got a group of people who do nothing but answer questions for David. That's a wasted resource. So, I think that's part of it. I also would say to you, some of that's organizational behavior, and it's hard to stop because maybe with the people that you work most closely with, for example, my executive team, my C-suite, I think they all understood me. After a little while, you get some leveling, and then, okay, we get it. Like, he's, we don't have to go marching off to Versailles to, see Marie Antoinette. This is a pretty basic discussion. But farther down in the organization, it's not necessarily the case. People are spooked. It's like the CEO's coming, we need to paint. I remember being in Brazil. I went to one of our packaging plants, and they were, really excited to have me there to see me. But when I walked in, I could smell the paint. Like they had just painted the walls because I was coming, and it needed to be, fresh paint. And I remember leaving, and the operations guy, I get back, and David Smith says to me, how'd it go down there? I was like, David, I don't know what you tell these people to do. Like, they don't need to paint the walls. Because he said, did they paint that place? I said, yeah. He said, well, it needed to be painted, but it should.
You were a good excuse to get the paint.
I'm just saying, it's that kind of thing as people want to, do that. And to some degree, actually, it's good to let them do it because they feel good about it. They feel like they did something, and the CEO was here and he enjoyed his visit, and he learned a few things as opposed to
love the paint.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and some CEOs take the position, they go in, all they want to do is business reviews. Let's ask questions about strategy. How many people do we have? Can we, reduce the headcount a little bit? How about expenses? What's our operating line here? What's a 5% cut look like? What would we be giving up? Like, you can do all that stuff, but I always felt that was the responsibility of the C-suite. That's not my job. Like, I can do that. I know how to do it. I did it for a living for a while, but I thought that's what I held my people accountable for. I set a target, like we're going to have, we need to have 9 to 10% sales growth, and we need to have 15% earnings per share growth. Mr. CFO, what's that look like in a budget? It's going to look like this. And then everybody goes, oh, you're cutting my budget. I can't, I remember sitting with the head of R&D and saying, he was like, well, we're going to have to cut $100 million. I said, well, before you do that, show me how you're spending the first $4 billion. I just, run me through the $4 billion before we get to the last $100 million, because I want to be sure that's all being spent as effectively as possible. And I'd like to do it at a line item level. Like, let's really get into the details. And that's when they say, you know what, the $100 million's not a problem.
Yeah.
I got it.
Well,
because I don't want you to look at this other stuff, because this is where I got all the bones are
you're
buried.
You're too busy for this.
This is where the bones are buried.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I've always thought of you as a very genuine person, and you've talked about that before. Just like part of leadership is that you got to be yourself. Mm-hmm. I would think that would have been not necessarily a struggle, but definitely a transition for you, where you're perceived very differently because of your position, in an organization, and you just being a candid, genuine person sets in motion, havoc. So to me, what I hear you saying is that you consciously realize that, and then you're adjusting your behavior to more effectively play the role, so that all of these other things, don't take place, or you just get more used to it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think a fair amount of that, again, back to my point around, a couple of years into the CEO job in London, and my view of what my relationship with the C-suite executives should be, I kind of redirected. Like, I could be very open and candid and honest with them about anything, and to most extent, I think they would say the same about me. I think in retrospect, if you were to ask the gang that worked directly for me, that I did their performance appraisals and gave them their bonuses and determined their raises and gave them feedback, demanding but fair, or fair but demanding. The word fair is there, because that's how I like to see things. When we do your performance appraisal, I hope you're not going to be surprised, because we've had these conversations throughout the course of the year, And that's the same when you're a district manager and you got a sales rep and you've ridden with them 9 or 10 times. They
don't know what's coming.
That's right. Or you haven't been clear. Like, that's on me as a manager, not you as a performer. I need to make sure that you're clear. And the best thing I can do is get you to tell me what it is you think I think, because then the words are coming out of your mouth, which is something that I think a lot of people miss on. I think, and it's hard to get people to do that, because you have to wait. That's that awkward moment of silence. You say, tell me what we just talked about. Please describe it in your own words. I just want to hear it.
Spit it back to me.
Make sure we're clear.
Yeah. There's also a question I have to ask you. And I also recognize that you might not be able to just say candidly, here's everything that went on. But my understanding, you were not only like CEO of AstraZeneca, you were like president of the Pharma Biotech Association, and were actually in the room with President Obama and others for healthcare reform during his first term.
Yes.
That must have been like a wild table to be sitting around. What was that in terms of leadership and influence and all of those different kinds of things? Like, what was that like? What was, you're representing, hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
What's it like being in that room?
In the room, it was politics. It was trading. That's what it was in the room. It was, how much money can the pharma organization / all the companies put on the table as offsets against the increased cost of healthcare? And that was an enormous debate amongst the members of pharma before we ever got to the White House to meet with the president and Rahm Emanuel, his watchdog. And we ended up at around $80 billion as the give over a 10-year period of time, through filling in the donut hole, some discounting that would happen at, the federal level. Like, there were 19 different ways to put together a package, but the only thing that mattered was the round number of $80 billion, which we got negotiated up to. They negotiated it up to 100. And the discussion was trade-off. It was clearly, if you guys don't bring more than that to the table, got to remember there was a supermajority. It was House was Democrat, Senate was Democrat, and the president was a Democrat, and they could pass legislation. And there was bad legislation. Importation was legislation that pharma was scared, would absolutely make a mess of things. Forcing Medicare Part D to rebates to be the same level as the Department of Defense and Veterans Administration rebates rather than done by the market. There were 3 or 4 big things that we thought as a pharma organization, the companies would cost us hundreds of billions of dollars. So we were willing to go to the table to do it. And so it was much more about getting pharma aligned on what it was we were going to go to the table to have a discussion about, because there was always some behind the scenes stuff going on that by the time you get in the room with Rahm Emanuel and Obama, they know what you're going to put on the table. And you know what they're going to ask you to do. Or you have a pretty good idea and they have a pretty good idea. And then it's just a matter of getting, okay, we agree. And, and I was there with just a couple other CEOs, just a few of us that went over to meet with them. What was it like? I think for them, we were just one thing to check off, because they had 24 constituencies they needed to meet with to get this done the way they wanted, right? So it was like, get in, get it done, get out, make sure we don't have bad legislation, and let's let this thing happen and see where it goes. So,
from your career as a DM in Chicago to that level, to sitting at that table, what advice would you have for leaders of the future? So people that they're starting their careers. I think it's easy, and maybe it always has been, but I think it's easy to get disheartened. When you start to think about how much effort do I want to put into this, because the world is such a mess. I mean, what kind of dent am I going to make? Like what is it? So there's even more obstacles to becoming an effective leader, than maybe there have been historically, or at least more complicated obstacles. What advice would you have, and what's your, crystal ball for the future? Where are we going? What does it look like from the standpoint of leadership and challenges and these kinds of things?
I don't think leadership will ever be displaced by the digital world. So, digital world's displacing a lot of things. I think technology is advancing more rapidly than anyone probably could have ever predicted. And I do think that will change the way work gets done, analysis, like a lot of things can be enabled through reducing the personal requirement that somebody used to have to do that, and now it can be done a different way. But I don't think any of that will replace the responsibility of leadership. I think going forward, if it's more challenging, you have to be clearer in your own mind about the why of what you're doing. You said, I could become disheartened because it's a cruel world, as opposed to, I need to really understand why I'm doing this. Like, I need to have a personal, down deep belief that what I'm doing is important somewhere to someone. That's, in the pharmaceutical business, it's about a patient. Like, you make a difference in a patient's life and you should feel good about it. Like, wow. And if you take a look at the advances in the 40 plus years now I've been in the industry, in medicine, but especially on the pharmaceutical biologic side, on the biopharmaceutical side, it's enormous. It's enormous. Products that made Merck the leading company in the late 1970s in the pharmaceutical world, Merck Sharp and Dohme. I think if those products were prescribed now by doctors for high blood pressure or depression or arthritis, you'd be sued for malpractice. The things that are available now, 40 years later, are so much of an advance technologically. But I think you have to understand why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Does it matter? Does it make a difference? You know, are you punching a clock? Are you taking a paycheck? Or do you really believe in what you're doing? And you know, I used to use this little story about the three guys in the sidewalk, right? And you know, one guy's taking bricks and putting mortar on it and putting it down on the sidewalk and doing it again, and you walk up and you say, what are you doing? He said, what do you think I'm doing? I'm putting bricks and mortar here. And you go to the guy 10 feet down who's doing exactly the same thing. And you say, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a wall. And you go to the third guy who's 10 feet down from him and doing the same thing. And you say, what are you doing? He said, I'm building a cathedral. And you know, you have to understand the cathedral, even if you're slinging bricks and mortar every day. It's like, do I really know why I'm doing what I'm doing? And is it important? Is that important to do? Right? I think that's, you know, that's the best advice I could give anybody.
Find something where you buy into the why and just
do your best.
Attack it.
Sam, I had a job once I didn't like. And I was in the job for close to a year and a half, 2 years when I was working in Rahway. And the general manager position opened up for the ophthalmic business that was mostly in Europe, but it was based in Rahway, even though it was a European, mostly European and Japanese thing. And I knew the guy who was the general manager was resigning. He came in my office and said to me, I'm going up to meet with our boss tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and I'm going to tell him I'm resigning because I'm going to be the president of company X, which is an ophthalmic company. And so I knew he was meeting with him at 9, so at 9:01 I went upstairs and stood outside my boss's door, his boss's door, and this guy came out and I walked in. And I said, listen, I know what's going on, can I have his job? And he said, it's a Dutch guy. And he said to me, why? I thought you loved your job, you do it so well. You're the person I count on to handle all of that. And I said, well, Joe, like, don't get confused by like how I do the work and what I think of the work. Like, you know, you can get someone else to do that. I really want to get a line job again. Like, let me get back to, you know, creating value, you know. But it was surprising. He's like, I thought you loved that job. It's like, oh my God, nothing could be farther from the truth. I do it really well. But,
that's sort of a compliment, but then again, you know.
But that's the point. Nobody should ever know. If you don't particularly care for it, it shouldn't show in your work, or your performance is going to suffer.
And then find something you love doing it and go at it as you have. Let me end this pretty much the same way I started it, by saying we, anybody that'll look at this, you know, honored, you know, that you're here. But I'm also honored to call you a friend, sir.
Well, thanks.
Thank you.
You are my friend.
So much
That's why
on behalf of everyone for spending the time and providing the insight.
Good. Well, thanks. This is great. It's a little bit of a walk down memory lane, and a good one at that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.